Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? All those nights when you've got no lights, the check is in the mail, and your little angel hung the cat up by its tail, and your third fiancé didn't show. Sometimes you wanna go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You wanna be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You wanna be where everybody knows your name. Roll out of bed, Mr. Coffee's dead. The morning's looking bright. And your shrink ran off to Europe and didn't even write. And your husband wants to be a girl. Be glad there's one place in the world where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You wanna go where people know people are all the same. You wanna go where everybody knows your name.
Hello everyone and welcome along to the Irish Bookshop show. We're here in Red Books in the heart of Wexford town. We're still locked down, as you can see. It's the 32nd week of lockdown, but we're continuing to operate thanks to all of you. So I want to show you a couple of the books that are sitting on the shelves to begin with. The first one is The Becker Wives and Other Stories by Mary Lavin. So Mary Lavin is considered one of the proto women writers of the 20th century who kind of set popular women's writing for the latter half of the century. This particular collection of short stories was written in 1946, and Lavin always wrote about characters who were, I suppose, stuck in a rut. In fact, what she done, I suppose, has provided a framework for many people who followed her, like Enda O'Brien, Maeve Binchy, even Sally Rooney. So, comprised of 4 short stories: The Becker Wives, The Joyride, A Happy Death, and Magenta. This collection is one of Lavin's most celebrated. What you're dealing with here are characters struggling to free themselves in places that are often hostile to their desires. So you have a new bride coming home to her husband's prim family, 2 butlers taking a rare opportunity to go out drinking, a woman pleading with her dying husband to repent, and a young housekeeper whose fortunes seem to have suddenly changed. So these are obviously reissues of the 1946 copy. They're brand new, done by New Island, €5 on the irishbookshop.com. Fantastic Irish fiction. Next up we have this book, also brand new, Warships, U-Boats and Liners, a guide to shipwrecks mapped in Irish waters by the Irish National Seabed Survey and Infomar mapping projects. So, fantastic book, some fantastic pictures in there, and you can see the size of it. Brand new, €5 on the irishbookshop.com. A must for anybody with an interest in maritime history or history in general. Next up, we've something very special. Frances Ledwidge, Selected Poems. Again, this is a modern reissue. We've only a couple of these left, brand new on the irishbookshop.com for €5 each. So Frances Ledwidge was a young Irish poet. He was a fierce nationalist and socialist. He was involved in his local union in Meath, very interested in workers' rights at a time when that wasn't very popular. He was also very interested in seeing a free Ireland. He joined the Volunteers, the Irish Volunteers, and when it came to the split over the Home Rule issue and Redmond's desire to get the Volunteers to enlist and fight in the First World War, Ledwidge spoke out against it at a public meeting very strongly, But I think it's the mark of the man. He was so honourable that at the end of the meeting, um, with the split coming, he decided to stay with Redmond and enlisted in the army. There was a local lord who told Ledwidge that he didn't have to fight, that he would basically write him off so that he could stay home. And Ledwidge refused to accept this. He didn't want to have anything. He didn't want to be better than anybody else. And he went off and fought in the war. He wrote a lot of poetry there, which is collected in this book. There was a collection of poets fighting in the First World War. The things they seen touched their sensitive souls, I suppose, and they created incredible works. Ledwidge was killed around the Battle of Passchendaele in 1917. He was, fortunately, he didn't get a very heroic death. He was in charge of some road being laid, which was essential for the war effort. They stopped for a tea break, and a German shell landed near where he was standing and killed him instantly. He's not remembered the way he should be remembered, probably because of the political situation afterwards. But he's a great Irish poet, and you can get these copies of the book for €5 each on theirishbookshop.com. So I'm going to come back later on with some more books, but for now I want to finish up with this set. So this is a 6-volume 1896 edition of 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights. Beautiful condition. As you can see, I'll just show you some of the beautiful illustrations. The Arabian Nights Volume 1, and we have all the springs of the desert have less refreshed the Arabs than these delightful tales, and they cast their gems and genii over our benighted and foggy regions. So, absolute beautiful books. Now, it's the 1896 6-volume edition, so go on to AB Books or our friends in Amazon or anybody like that and look up how much these are making. And pause the video and go on and do it. And I'm going to tell you how much we're charging for this set. Obviously, we only have one. I've only ever seen one set of these. We're selling these for €70 on theirishbookshop.com. A great investment piece. We don't expect them to stick around for long, so get in and buy them. Delivery anywhere in Ireland, obviously free delivery in Wexford but delivery anywhere in Ireland. We'll be able to put these into a 680 bag. So there you go. So now we're going to go along with the show. First up is the great Dahi Kavanagh, who's going to tell us about his new book. It's the 2nd volume of his dystopian trilogy, and I'll join you later on.
How are you, lads? Wally asked me to do a video for Thursday night, and it's about a book I'm bringing out shortly. You can order from Red Books. Wally will put you down for a copy. It's called The Hydra Syndrome, and it's part of a dystopian trilogy that I'm writing. This is the 2nd book in the trilogy. It's called The Hydra Syndrome. So the first one was called The Green Wave. Maybe some of you have read it. And the last one in this trilogy is called The Storm, and it's about a Nazi takeover. But this one, The Hydra Syndrome, is about a virus, which I suppose at the moment is pretty appropriate. So the character in the book is trapped in his house in London. He moved there in his early 20s to become an art student, and from Ireland, and his name is Oisin Maguire, and he married an English woman, and they settled in together. And basically the backset for the story is the virus, and the fact that there's gangs roaming the streets killing people, blaming them for the virus, the onset of the virus, old people, politicians, people in charge. And Oisin is trapped in his house. his wife succumbed to cabin fever and handed herself over to the mob and got duly hacked to pieces. But Oisin is having none of that, and he's staying in the house surviving on tins of meat and beans, drinking bottles of wine, cans of beer, prescription drugs, and he's going over the disaster that was his life. And it's basically deals with people's personalities, how we succumb not only to viruses but to our own 7 deadly sins would be a way of putting it. Violence, sex, drugs, alcohol, and all the things that afflict us during our lives. So it's a kind of philosophical book, you could say, in a sense, and looks into the personality of this individual, but really it's an examination of human nature. So I hope you get a chance to read it, and I'd like to say thanks to Wally and Red Books for giving me the opportunity to bring out my books and present them to people so I can sell them. Hope you enjoy the book when it comes out. Thanks a lot, lads. Bye.
Whew. Got a little personal with that last video. Now you're supposed to think of a new topic. But instead, he got drunk. And dressed up like Athena. Okay, got a new topic. Think about something. Be creative. Be creative. You are not a fraud. Hey, this lipstick is flavored. Cool. No, can't talk about makeup. Serious stuff, important stuff, literature stuff. Like Sherlock Holmes, maybe? Yeah. No. That is not Sherlock Holmes. What is he even doing in here? Hate you. God! Ugh! Get out of my head, Benedict. Get out. You go away. The cheek of this... Ugh. Modern Sherlock Holmes are the worst. You too, Downey. Get out of here. No. Out. Get out of here. Hey! Okay, no. Brett can stay. Brett can stay. So maybe not Sherlock. No. What is it like to be a writer? What is it like? Okay, accurate. I have ice cream in the freezer, don't I? But it's in the kitchen. Okay, so for serious now. Now I have to stop playing with makeup or talking about food. What am I going to talk about?
I'll talk about girls. That's what I'll do. At the risk of upsetting the beehive, women do not indeed run the world. We don't even get paid the same amount in the areas that we do run. And against those kind of platitudes, the poppy, just want to have fun, what women want, let's consider that collective idea for a moment so that they can be a love interest or, powerful in some marketing scheme. It's not really how gender works, is it? And that's where it's complicated because, on the inside, I always wanted to do the same adventures of the people I admired and the people that I followed and wanted to be like, to emulate, my idols. Those were not gender based. Those were based on things on the inside, their character and their strength, or their faults, even maybe, if their faults made them very human and relatable. And that was never really a gender thing. Now, being a Xennial, or an elder millennial, if that's your term, your preferred nomenclature, meant that I did most of my kind of maturing through youth materials, cartoons, things like that in the 80s. And it was dire for women in the 80s. The 90s were much better. You had your Carmen Sandiegos, your Clarissa Darlings, and, the great one. You had Miss Daria Morgendorfer. But when I was coming up, we had, it was just a landscape of wilderness. And so I was left with wanting to, insinuate myself into media that didn't necessarily reflect me. I wanted to criticize old movies on a spaceship. I wanted to, get a bottle under a bridge while I was on a quest. I still want to be the terror that flaps in the night. I mean, who doesn't want to do that? His purple outfit is sick. And more often than not, we found ourselves in the media that we did enjoy being the companion or the character that was rescued. Maybe we could be the love interest. The 90s improved on this a little bit, but they still kind of fell short because the 90s tended to do this thing where they just gender swapped ideas. Characters that might have been boys were suddenly girls, and to a point I understand that. We're not different in that regard. But they seem to glaze over something that I thought was really fundamentally important. And that's that, though, on the inside, I want the same adventures and I'm willing to take the same risks, and my character might be equally pure and my ambitions might be sound. The world does treat me differently. The world does have more resistance to me taking those things on. And in doing so, I often have to prove myself many times in these situations. Sometimes even in situations where it's just conversation with other people. I often have to defend my knowledge of something against someone who may be less knowledgeable than me. And an awful lot of those unfortunate dynamics still exist for people everywhere. So if you were looking at a map, say, of a quest in some media, or, a good video game, like the one with the bottle under the bridge.
It really is the best game ever.
It's not that we couldn't go on the same quest or the same journey. It's often that our route, our map, might look a little bit different. Because there are certain areas that, as a woman, I might have to avoid, and that would mean that the actual experience of my journey would look different. And I haven't seen a lot of material that does that without it being entirely about being a woman, or entirely about the mission as though a woman it was almost superfluous. It was almost irrelevant. I wanted to see stories that, acknowledge that it might be a little bit harder at times, but that didn't mean the person couldn't do it. It just meant that the doing it would look a little bit different. That was why I really liked the movie Kingsman. I'm not really one for secret agent spy sorts of movies. I find a lot of them kind of misogynistic and not really my thing at all. The women tend to be kind of hopped up, ubermensch sort of characters, or they're extremely sexual and not a lot of internal monologue that happens. They're not really complete women to me. They're just kind of these fantasies of what a woman should be if a man wished a woman to be this incredible thing. I don't often see myself in them. So when I was watching Kingsman, and then there's this woman candidate, and there's no mention that she's the first, and she's just kind of taken seriously the whole time. It made my heart swell a little bit. It made me excited. Of course, when she's the one that became the agent, and the movie then immediately pivoted to the guy instead, that seemed pretty typical. but it made me think an awful lot. What would it have been like to be that woman 20 years before? What would it have been like to be the first woman in that organization? And when would that have happened? Because you'd still be a super agent. You'd still be, secret and in the field and saving the world. You'd still be all of that cool stuff. But the experience would be different. And I guess that's what I wanted to talk about. Because in doing that, I ended up making a character that it wasn't just that she was a woman, but her being a woman definitely made the situation a bit different at times, and it meant that the way she felt about things was different and unique. And that character seemed a lot more real to me. And that was a character I wanted to keep writing and talking about. So that's what I did. Now, if only I could figure out what were the other elements. What else comes together to make a real person? And what can we do to flesh that character out in such a way that she's not just real to me, but she's real to readers too? What's missing so far? We've got my detail orientation. We've got my mental illness. Still checking in. We've definitely got the absence of women and how I noticed them and how I wish more people would notice them too. Women characters and women writing doesn't just exist for women. So if it's been a long time since you read a book where a woman was the principal character, ask yourself why. We're half the population. Our stories are compelling too. We don't just exist for one another. So ask yourself why. What else is missing? I'm sure I'll figure out what's missing by next week.
I never got to teach Powerline the perfect cast either. So many missed opportunities.
Bienvenue dans le CI des librairies irlandaises. Au-dessus de la ville, Samuel Beckett est au 151. Il y a de nombreux faits et chiffres que je pourrais vous transmettre au propos de Beckett. Par exemple, ses pièces, ses romans et ses nouvelles. Mais en tant qu'étudiant français, j'ai pris la décision aujourd'hui de discuter de ce vie en France, considérant qu'elle est l'équivalent franco-irlandais le plus connu de tout le temps. I thought I'd put a bit of a disclaimer in this video and mention why I might be so keen to focus in on the political and linguistic experiences of these writers. And the reason for that is not only because I'm a language and politics student, but also because I think that language and politics make these writers who they are, and they certainly make these writers' pieces what they are. You can see the cultural influence, you can see the cultural context, and we'll notice this especially in Samuel Beckett's experiences with French, and how France as a country, French culture, and of course the French language shaped him as a writer and his work so well. So Samuel Beckett began his career as a poet and novelist in the late 20s. And he studied French, English and Italian in Trinity College Dublin as part of the Modern Languages course, and he was also elected a scholar. Despite his being labelled as apolitical by many, he was deeply involved with fighting political injustices. For example, he's probably most famous for being very much against censorship. He joined the French resistance while in France. There he translated and edited scraps of information that was then smuggled out of France. For his work with the French resistance, the French government awarded him with the Croix de Guerre, as well as the Médaille de la Reconnaissance. And his politics continued throughout his life, when in 1982, his play Catastrophe, dedicated to the Czech writer and his friend Václav Havel, when Václav was under house arrest for his advocacy of free artistic expression. It is a well-known fact that Beckett began to write in French as a kind of challenge for himself, that he found writing in English too easy. However, the real reason is believed to be the poor reception of his first two works, both of which were written in English, and they were called More Pricks and Kicks in 1934 and Echoes Bones in 1935. In a letter to his friend Axel Kahn, he said, "More and more my own language appears to me like a veil that must be torn apart in order to get at the things of nothingness behind." And this conveys his frustration with the English language, which at the time was his mother tongue, and it also implies the minimalistic style that we witness throughout his work in his later years. Beckett was also proficient in Italian, German, and Spanish, and he actually translated and directed 7 of his stage plays and teleplays in German. He is often conceived as this kind of French or Irish writer and nowhere in between, but he was well read on Western culture and in literature of the Western world. For example, his characters were named after many literary heroes such as Shakespeare in Happy Days or Dante in Play. Beckett had many inspirations when it came to playwriting. The first inspiration he came across was Yeats. He saw his production while at Trinity, and he did have a hold on him, but he said most notably of all, J.M. Synge did. He was impressed by Synge's unusual blend of humour, but Beckett did mention that Synge influenced his work and his own theatre most of all. When Beckett saw the production of Playboy of the Western World and Tinker's Wedding most notably at the Abbey Theatre. And we do see kind of relevances of Synge's work and Synge's plot lines that do appear in Beckett's work. For example, Pozzo in Waiting for Godot and Hams in Endgame kind of relate to Christie murdering his father in Playboy of the Western World. Upon graduating from Trinity, Samuel Beckett took appointment at École Normale Supérieure, where he met James Joyce. I won't dwell too much on the relationship between Joyce and Beckett, but just know that it was an exciting one. And even if I did start to talk about it, I'd probably forget about something, because so much happened. But let's just say the two didn't click in the end, and they did over personal reasons, and they found each other insufferable. His first play was Human Wishes, which he completely abandoned. And his second play was Eleutheria, which I was lucky enough to get a copy of from Red Books on irishbookshop.com. And this is, believe me, extremely rare. It is difficult to find information about Eleutheria. All we know is that it was written in French and completed in less than 2 months. Upon its completion in 1947, Beckett was determined to shelter it from public, be it on stage, on screen, or published in book form, although I bought it last week, so I'll have to apologise. I'm going to read the blurb. Written in French in the late 40s before Waiting for Godot, Eleutheria is about a young man at odds with his middle-class family, living alone in a bedsit and refusing to take part in normal life, while accepting handouts from his mother. Often richly comic, it contains elements of high farce and draws on the traditions of French boulevard comedy and melodrama. David Patty, a reader of theatre in University of Chester, says it draws attention to the theatricality of the play. And despite this praise from many, it was too excessive for Beckett's own minimalist aesthetics in his own opinion. Regardless, it gave momentum to write En attendant pour Godot, which was later Waiting for Godot. Also on the irishbookshop.com, I got a copy of Murphy. And Murphy was the first novel published by Samuel Beckett. It's an avant-garde novel. And it was written in a manuscript in 6 small exercise books over the course of 10 months. This novel forms a bridge between the novels of James Joyce and the new literature of the post-war world. Not only is it revolutionary, but it is also exuberantly readable. So we've talked about the writers who have influenced Samuel Beckett, but I think it's time to talk about the writers who have been influenced by Samuel Beckett, and I being amongst them. And I suppose the kind of question is why? John Banville, a big name of course, wrote a lengthy, eye-opening piece about him for the Irish Times, and Maeve Binchy recalls her first encounter with Beckett as though it was yesterday. Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, who played the 2 main characters in Waiting for Godot on Broadway, we're also massive fans of his. And I've noticed myself that within my generation of young people today interested in reading and writing, that Beckett is perhaps the most famous and influential writer, and even to say his name is met with many gazes and, smiles of yes, agreement, like, yes, I do appreciate him as well. And the reason I think that is because he is just class and effortless in doing so. No other writer could sit around Parisian cafes and be admired as much as Beckett could. Every single photo that has ever been taken of Beckett just looks amazing, and somehow he has this kind of expanse that really comes off our phones or the books we're looking at by just looking at a photo of him. So I have to respect that. I hope you enjoyed this representation of Beckett on his 150th anniversary of his birth, and I hope you read some Beckett and pick it up if you haven't already, and if you already have, I hope you read more Beckett. And I hope you log on to the irishbookshop.com, which is where I got these two beauties that I'm very grateful for, and I hope that we can go into Red Books soon and have a gander.
I'm back again. So the first set of books I want to show you now, very special. We don't have many of these. They're brand new, 6-volume set of the history of the Irish Parliament, 1692 to 1800. So this is a paperback version of a set that was brought out by a professor in Dublin in 2002. It's really, really well regarded and very, very expensive online. This is volume 1. If you want to check out some of our online competitors, they charge €25 per volume at least. That's the cheapest you'll get that for. We're selling the whole set, brand new, for €50, which is fantastic, insane value. So the Irish Parliament from 1692 to 1800 was the last Irish elected assembly, which represented the whole of the island. It really set the standard for Irish life in the 18th century. And these books depict the life of its members, what they were doing, right up to the Act of Union in 1801. So that's an incredible set. Like I said, we don't have many of them. We actually only have one in the shop at the moment. So move in fast for them. Next up, we have a couple of these, brand new, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Stevenson, his breakthrough book. And also in this is The Merry Men and Other Stories, which was published the year afterwards. So I think most of you will be familiar with what Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is about. Dr. Henry Jekyll decides he wants to find his inner self, which at the time you had Madame Blavatsky, the Golden Dawn, all of these guys, kind of delving in, mixing Eastern mysticism with, I suppose, old European witchcraft and kind of the early psychoanalysis as well, and looking for the inner self and things like that was becoming a lot more common. So this is his play on this, which is a true thriller horror, been parodied many times and copied many times. Brilliant book, brand new, €3 at the irishbookshop.com. Next up, we have one of the top emerging writers in Ireland at the moment, Billy O'Callaghan with The Dead House. So this is Billy's take on the haunted house story. It's about an artist called Maggie Turner who's running from her own demons and takes refuge in an old pre-famine cottage. Fantastic writer, fantastic short story writer and novel writer. Enda O'Brien puts the blurb on this one: a moving work that builds to an elegant climax and is a welcome voice to the pantheon of new Irish writing. So that is very good. Next up, we've brand new copies. Look at this. Michael Collins, Dublin, 1916 to 1922. The story of the Republican leader from the 1916 Rising up until his assassination in 1922. So you've got the Rising, you've got the imprisonment afterwards, you've got the War of Independence and the beginning of the Civil War. Brand new books, €5 on the irishbookshop.com. And then we've something very special. We've only one of these. They're hard to get now. A hardback copy of Judging Dev by the acclaimed Irish historian Dermot Ferreter. Beautiful condition. Again, very expensive to buy online. We're selling this one for €20. Like I said, we've only one on the irishbookshop.com. So now, visit our website. We've lots of other books up there, lads. At the moment, we're continuing our lockdown sales. So all novels, all Irish novels, all romance and all thrillers are €3 each. We can deliver for free in Wexford Town. Fortunately, click and collect hasn't been reinstated because we're such a big threat to public health, obviously. But we can deliver for free in Wexford Town, and we have standard postage everywhere else, including bulk postage. So if you go and order 10 thrillers, we'll get them all into the one package. Order 10 thrillers off, let's say, Amazon, and you'll pay individual postage on each item. So that's how Jeff, I don't know if you've seen in the news this week, but Jeff Bezos launched a rocket to the moon. That's how he's paying for his rocket, thanks to your money. So support an Irish bookshop instead. And now back to the show.
Thanks, Wally, and everyone else for letting me carry on with the Women Writers series. This evening I'd like to give you a flavour of Isabel Allende and the genre of magical realism. Isabel Allende was born in Peru in 1942 and she was brought up in Chile. She worked as a journalist there, but after the 1973 military coup led by Pinochet, she started to help people escape the country. She received death threats and had to flee to Venezuela, where she started to write novels. Her debut, The House of Spirits, was published in 1982. She now lives in California and during her career has published around 20 novels, selling over 74 million copies, as well as memoir, including one about her daughter Paula, who died tragically in 1992 as a result of a medical mistake. Isabel Allende's fiction often incorporates magical realism. This is fiction with a realistic setting, but including some magical, supernatural or miraculous elements, with events that are too strange to be rational but can still act as a part of the story. At the same time, the long agony of political repression and dictatorship of the Pinochet regime in Chile has been very much alive in Allende's writing. In Of Love and Shadows, journalist Irene and photographer Francisco encounter a young girl, Evangelina, believed to have miraculous powers, but after her disappearance they're led to investigate an appalling crime connected with the military regime. I'm just going to read an extract. Inside and outside the house, hope seized the pilgrims. One by one, they drew near Evangelina to request their small, humble miracles. Cure my carbuncles, Santita. Don't let them take my Juan off to the army. God save you, Evangelina, full of grace. Heal my poor husband's hemorrhoids. Give me a sign. What number should I play in the lottery? Stop the rain, handmaiden of God, before my goddamn seeds rot in the ground. Those who had come motivated by faith or simply as a desperate measure filed by in orderly fashion, pausing an instant beside the young girl to offer their plea, and then moved on, transfigured by the confidence that through his intermediary they would be favoured by divine providence. No one heard the army truck pull up. Magical realism is something the South American writers do really well. You might be familiar with the work of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Jorge Luis Borges, or Carlos Fuentes, for example. It's the fusion of the modern world with a more primal spirit world. Eva Luna is one of Isabel Allende's great characters. She's the daughter of Consuelo, a domestic who was raised as an orphan by Catholics, and of a South American Indian who Consuelo cured of a viper bite by an unconventional and perhaps magical method, which you'll have to read the book to find out. So this is Eva's picaresque journey, and here's a short extract with magical realism at work. The rain dragged shacks from the hillsides, overflowed the river that runs through the city, flooded houses, carried away cars, trees, and half the sports stadium. Cameramen from national television climbed into rubber boats and filmed victims on the roofs of houses, waiting patiently to be rescued by military helicopters. Although stunned and hungry, many sang, because it would have been pointless to aggravate misfortune by complaining. The rain ceased at the end of a week, the result of the same empirical solution used years before to combat the drought. Again the bishop paraded the statue of the Nazarene, and a huge crowd followed with their umbrellas, praying and making vows, mocked by Weather Bureau employees who had communicated with colleagues in Miami and found that, according to weather balloons and cloud measurements, the drenching rain would continue for 9 more days. The sky, however, cleared only 3 hours after the Nazarene was returned to his altar in the cathedral, wet as a dish rag despite the canopy that had been intended to protect him. Dye from his wig ran in dark rivulets down his face. The devout fell to their knees, crying that the statue was sweating blood. City of the Beasts is a young adult novel, but I'd recommend it for any reader. It's a moving story of a teenage boy, Alex, whose mother, Lisa, is in hospital with cancer. His grandma, a travel writer, has to look after him, but she's about to go on an expedition up the Amazon and won't change her plans. That's the Amazon River, Wally, and nothing to do with Jeff Bezos, okay? As they travel upriver, Alex starts to live in harmony with nature. He learns the culture and the rituals of the local people and undergoes a magical coming-of-age ceremony. And this extract happens just after that. Thousands of miles away, in a hospital in Texas, Lisa was receiving her chemotherapy. She tried not to think about the drug that, like a poison, flowed through her veins to fight the worst poison of her illness. To distract herself, she was concentrating on each note of the flute concerto she was listening to, the one she had heard her son rehearsing so many times. At the same moment that Alex, in his delirium, was dreaming about her deep in the jungle, Lisa saw her son with absolute clarity. She saw him in the doorway of her room, taller and stronger, more mature and more handsome than she remembered. Lisa had called him so often in her thoughts that she was not surprised to see him. She didn't ask how or why he had come. She simply gave herself to the pleasure of having him at her side. "Alexander, Alexander," she murmured. She held out her hands and he moved forward to touch her. He knelt beside the chair and put his head on her knees. As Lisa repeated her son's name and stroked the back of his neck, from the earphones, through the diaphanous notes of the flute, she heard his voice asking her to fight, not to give in to death, telling her over and over, "I love you, Mama." Alexander's meeting with his mother might have lasted an instant or several hours. Neither of the two knew for sure. When finally they said goodbye and returned to the material world, they were strengthened. So in magical realism, I see a kind of similarity with Ireland, where the ancient myths and beliefs of past generations of indigenous people, the power of the natural world, are blended with the relics and miracles of Catholicism and inspire the modern imagination. I'm reading The Infinite Plan at the moment, which I bought in Red Books, and if there are 74 million books out there, you can bet that Wally's going to have a few copies on offer of some of her work. Otherwise, theirishbookshop.com may still have some copies of Wexford Women Writing Undercover, released last month, a wonderful anthology of short fiction, life writing, poetry and art. Thanks for listening.
Hi everyone, how's things? D.A. Gaisley here. Hope you're all keeping well. A big hello to our friends watching in Kildare and Meath and around the world tonight. So tonight on the Irish Bookshop Live, I'm going to talk about the life, the times and the works of the great Irish playwright, short story writer, novelist and essay writer John B. Keane. All the books that I talk about tonight are available from www.irishbookshop.com, or if you just drop Wally a message, he should be able to post them out to you. So the first, just a little outline then of John B. Keane's life. So John B. Keane was born on the 21st of July 1928 in a Kerry town called Listowel. And he would remain most of his life in Listowel, where he ran a bar from 1955 to his death on the 30th of May 2002 at the age of 73. And John was actually the son of a national school teacher, William B. Keane, and his wife Hannah. And John then was educated at Listowel National School and also St. Michael's College in Listowel. And apart from 4 years from 1951 to 1955 when he worked in the UK, he spent the rest of his life living in Listowel town. In 1955 he married Mary O'Connor, who would remain his wife until his death in 2002. I knew Mary very well. I also know John's son Billy very, very well. John and Mary actually had 4 children. Billy now is a regular writer for the Irish Independent. So basically then John ran a bar in this old town, and this is where he wrote most of his plays, where he got the inspiration after hearing stories from most of his plays and most of his novels. So the first play then that I'm going to talk about tonight that John wrote is probably his most famous. It was made into a 1990 movie by Jim Sheridan and starring Richard Harris, and that is The Field. So The Field then tells the story of a man's love for the land and what he would do to get that land back when it's taken away from him. So the Bull McCabe is the main character, and now he's probably one of the most famous characters in Irish writing, of all time. The Field is also on the junior and leaving cert curriculum, so many people may know it. The Field was first produced by the Olympia Theatre in Dublin on the 1st of November 1965, and then an edited 2-act version was first produced by the Abbey Theatre in 1987. So the main characters then in this play would include the Bull McCabe, his son Tig, the Bird, who remains around the local bar all day and kind of a bit of a gossip, and the American who comes and tries to take the Bull's field. The Bull thinks he's entitled to this field, and it's also a very poignant play. It's brilliant. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. The play is also based on a true story which kind of happened back in Kerry back in the day when a man was killed, and there is similarities now over the years. People have wondered, is it based on what happened in Kerry at that time between the two farmers? Many people do believe it is a true story. It does ring a true story. So I'd highly recommend reading the play, and when things get back to normal, going to see the play and also watching the movie. So the second play that I'm going to talk about was 1959 was the first time it aired, and this is Sive. This is also on the junior leaving cert English curriculum, so many people might know it. John said about this play, he said that I put everything into writing of the play. He said, for me, writing the final scene was one of the most profound moments of my life. I was overwhelmed with emotion. So basically this story then is set in the harsh poverty and difficult times in 1950s Ireland, and it's a story of greed and of bitterness, of a scheming matchmaker and a resentful woman forcing a beautiful girl to marry an old man. Very powerful play, and the final scenes are very, very emotional. Now, it caused extreme controversy at the time, and the Abbey Theatre actually rejected it. So instead, it was then put on by the Listowel Drama Group, and eventually it was put on by the Abbey Theatre. Today it has become the fabric of one of Ireland's most famous plays. I'd highly recommend it again. It's a 10 out of 10. Anything really wrote by John B. Keane and me is a 10 out of 10. He was a quality playwright. So the third play then I'm going to talk about as well, and people may recognise it as well because it is on the junior Leaving Cert English curriculum, and that is Big Maggie. And Big Maggie, basically the plot then of Big Maggie is that on the death of her husband, Maggie Pulpin is determined to create a better life for herself. But problems arise when her vision of her future begins with the increasing discomfort on the shoulders of her offspring. John B. Keane created, I must say, a wonderful Irish matriarch in this play. And John also, highly recommend this play as well. And this play first appeared in 1969 in the Opera House of Cork, and then the revised appeared in the Abbey Theatre in 1988. Once again, a quality play, highly recommended. Personally, myself, my favourite John B. Keane play. And the final then John B. Keane play I'm going to talk about tonight, which first appeared in 1963, is The Year of the Hiker. And this one is, the hiker is a much hated father, and who has deserted his wife, and they're kind of, waiting his, arrival back with fear. Once again, a very, very good play. It was first put on in 1963 in the Father Matthew Hall in Cork. A 9 out of 10 for me, but once again, another quality play by the great John B. Keane. So then we're going to move on to one of John's novels, and this is the Bowron Makers. Extremely good book. Basically, it's a story of passion and conflict that will grip the reader from start to finish. A story of people driven to rebel, and it's humorous, very, very humorous. John B. Keane is the master of storytelling, in my opinion. And then the final one then tonight is John B. Keane. He was most famous for kind of doing these letters as well, and this is called Letters of a Successful TD. Once again, another quality book. There is some brilliant one-liners in it. Another very big success for John. So I hope everyone enjoyed tonight with me talking through some of the works by the brilliant Irish playwright, the brilliant novelist, essay writer, short story writer, whatever John could put his hand to, he could. His pub in Listowel is still open. It's been ran by Billy at the moment. Very popular pub if you're ever down in Listowel. There's also a statue of the great man himself in the town of Listowel. So thank you very much everyone for listening tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. D.A. Gaisley signing out. Take care.
Well now everybody, here is a new song, and it's a song that's rarely heard. It's taken from John B. Keane's play, Many Young Men of 20, and it's a great Irish song. It's a song you might have heard called Many Young Men of 20, and it's based on the play by the great playwright from Listowel, John B. Keane. So here is the song Many Young Men of 20 from the play by John B. Keane, Many Young Men of 20. It's a song of immigration. Many young men of 20 said goodbye all that long day, from the break of dawn until the sun was high. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. They left the factories and the farms and rallied and the call to arms. All the lassies turned their heads to cry. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. Last night I held my darling in my arms. Farewell, my love. It breaks my heart to see you cry. Farewell, my love, for maybe I will die. I wish that I was back again beside my darling in the glen. they fly. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. All that long day, from the break of dawn until the sun was high. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. All that long day, from the break of dawn until the sun was high. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. Many young men of 20 said goodbye. And that was Many Young Men of 20 Said Goodbye from the play Many Young Men of 20 Said Goodbye by the great playwright from Kerry, John B. Keane.
Big books, I cannot lie. You speed readers can't deny. When you get stuck with an itty-bitty text, you read it real fast and you're on to the next. Give me Gone with the Wind or Doc Zhivago, War and Peace. Here I go. Walking down the hallway, heading to my classes. I'm looking for a girl wearing glasses. She's got what it takes to please. A library card, no eye disease. Take her home to meet my mother. We break up and catch her reading with my brother.